Welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast, the show by fans for fans of your Milwaukee Brewers. Brewer fans, welcome back to Brew Crew Review. This is podcast number 47. With me today is Vince and Scott. Hey, guys.
Hey,
Craig. Scotty, how many beers deep are you today?
I had 5 beers and a bottle of champagne because had to.
It is October 1st, and your 2018 Milwaukee Brewers are NL Central champions. Congratulations to the guys on the team and to both to Vince and Scott for a long season of up and down during our podcast, but was not confident all the way that the Brewers would be standing here at the end of the regular season as NL Central champions. But they took it down to Wrigley Field and the cocky Chicago Cubs and their arrogant fans and took it right to their house and beat them and stole away the NL Central crown from a team that a pretty good Chicago Cubs team. So what are your guys' thoughts on the last week as the Brewers have now won 8 consecutive games to close out the 2018 regular season?
I mean, boy, Craig, that stat right there just kind of hits it on the head for me. Winning 8 games in the clutch down the stretch like this for a Brewers team that, I think it could reasonably have said for those 8 games that we would probably win 5, maybe 6 games. I think that was sort of the expectation that if we played well, that was going to be our win total. But to come by and win 8 games in a row, just incredible. I mean, we took the series in Pittsburgh on the road before that too. So I mean, it's just an absolute treat to watch these guys right now. You could tell how fired up they are. It seems like a great group of guys in terms of camaraderie and team chemistry, which is a lot of fun to watch. And some of the interactions from the players with the fans this past week has been really interesting and I think exciting as well when you saw a letter from Christian Yelich to the Players Tribune and other guys talking about how the fan support made all the difference in the world. I don't think it was just paying lip service. I think that this is a group of mostly younger guys or guys that haven't necessarily played in the postseason before, outside of guys like Lorenzo Cain, and Ryan Braun, who are very hungry for that experience and love being in Milwaukee. So it's really exciting to see.
Yeah, I think if you would have asked me, I guess 10 days ago or whatever it was, that, hey, do you think that the Brewers are going to be able to rattle off 8 straight wins? I would say absolutely not. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think I'm overall pretty positive about it. But unfortunately, kind of the way that we use the bullpen, it's almost like set up in a way that we're hoping to kind of take 2 or 3 here and there and here and there. And it makes it really difficult to rattle off something like 8 straight wins. When you have a guy like Hader that you're like, okay, we're going to throw him tonight. We got the lead, and we're not throwing him tomorrow no matter what. And that kind of leaves your bullpen a little bit thin when you're not going to use your best relievers the following day. But it all seemed to work out here, and just really, really excited and really proud of the team.
Well, I think if you guys look at the roller coaster that was the 2018 regular season, let's start way back in last offseason when possibly one of the greatest days in hindsight in Brewers history, hopefully, was a day back in January, a couple days before the Brewers on Deck event, I believe, where David Stearns acquired 2018 NL MVP, elect via trade from the Florida Marlins, and also signed Lorenzo Cain, who is a former member, as Vince pointed out, of the world champion Kansas City Royals, and once also a former Brewer coming up through our system. Both those guys, huge keys to our success for the season. Obviously, Cain in the number 1 spot, and Yelich hitting number 2, and really putting a Triple Crown season worth of stats into his MVP campaign. But then once the season got going, I think the Brewers, they really overachieved right out of the gates. Obviously, everyone who did the preseason predictions before the season started thought for sure that the Cubs would take the NL Central and the Brewers might be a surprise team. But the Brewers came out of the gates. We're in first well, they won the Cactus League championship in spring training, showed some of their potential. Then they went on to be leading the division for most of the first half. But most people who thought they knew everything about baseball thought, well, they were going to stay and the Cubs were going to win the division, which did eventually. They did overtake first place as the kind of limped into the All-Star break, losing 5 games in the series in Pittsburgh. And we eventually did lose that. But to make it even sweeter, the Cubs fans thought they had the division wrapped up and put us kind of in their rearview mirror. Well, we caught back up in the final week, and we beat them on their home turf, and now we're NL Central champions, and it's awesome.
Yeah, there was a couple quotes that got thrown out there throughout the course of the year from the Cubs that I found to be particularly interesting. And one of the quotes talked about how, I think it was something along the lines of they were never worried about. At that point, they were 2 or 3 games behind the Brewers, but they said that they've never even thought about that. Like, it was never a concern that they couldn't win the division against a team like Milwaukee. And then, of course, Cole Hamels' now infamous comments after his trade to the Cubs that the Brewers were not rivals to Chicago, and that it wasn't a real rivalry of any type. And I think that those comments really did come back to bite the Cubs in the butt a little bit because fans not only noticed that, but so did the players. And I think that just amped up this team even more to make this push down the stretch. I think it would have been very easy for Brewers to be content with gunning for a wild card at one point. We put this on Twitter a couple of days ago, but at the beginning of September, the Brewers were in 3rd place. They were 4.5 games behind the Cubs and a half game behind the Cardinals for the division. And I think that it would have been very easy at that point to say that the math says to aim for the wild card, to make that your focal point. I give a ton of credit to the team and to Craig Counsell and others with the organization for not being content with the wild card, for wanting to be division champions. And that will, I think, be a huge boost, obviously, in the playoffs to be able to avoid a one-and-done scenario in a wild card play-in game. Able to play a full NLDS guaranteed and home field advantage is a huge boost for this team. So I think that those comments from the Cubs may have had something to do with that being the case.
Yeah, it should really be interesting too. I mean, obviously, at the time of taping, we've just won the division, and then of course, we're going to watch these wild card games tomorrow when this episode probably pops up there. But it's going to be interesting because if the Cubs win their wild card game, then we get home field advantage, but they definitely have a chance at revenge. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't know. I mean, it's just great to even be like, quote, the 1 seed in the National League instead of having to worry about a wild card game. So that's definitely very exciting. I mean, it's the 3rd time that the Brewers have ever even won the division. So it's definitely exciting times.
Yeah, I think 4th overall, but yeah, third time in a non-strike year. I think 81. It's kind of a weird how that counts. So I don't even know if that officially counts or not. But with it being a strike-short year that year, and the Brewers were eliminated in the playoffs by the Yankees that season. But yeah, certainly this is exciting, and it's just a great time to be a Brewers fan.
And of course, back when the Brewers were in the American League, there were I think 7 or 8 teams in the division, and it was much harder to win it back then. But since '98, which has now been unbelievably so, 20 years since 1998, and wow, such a summer to remember for baseball. 1998, obviously now knowing the steroid era, kind of put a sad asterisk on it. But I mean, back then when McGuire and Sosa had that magical year, and the Brewers weren't very good that year, but we were just moving into I think that was our first year in the NL, and 20 years has passed, and the Brewers still have only won a few more division titles. But this one, with the beating the Cubs, who are obviously favorites to win the division, is huge in my mind. I know going into the season, most people are thinking who are the best teams in the NL. A lot of them had picked the Washington Nationals to win the NL East, and they underachieved big time to make playoffs. Everyone picked the Cubs to win the Central. They're not division champions. The Brewers are. And NL West, a lot of people picked the Dodgers. And even though they had a really hard fight with the Rockies, it came down to also game 163, and it turns out that the Dodgers did win the division over the Rockies. So the Rockies will be playing the Cubs for the wild card, and the Brewers will get the winner of Rockies or Cubs. What are your guys' thoughts on, obviously, who do you think will emerge from the wild card game? It will be played at Wrigley Field, possibly on the same day you guys are, anyone listening to this podcast. But what are your guys' thoughts on that game, I guess?
I mean, the Cubs are pretty beat up right now. It seems like they've really had a tough September with the Brewers chasing them the way that they have been the past few weeks, and they have played a pretty intense schedule. So I think they have to be deflated before the put all the expectations on them. So to see them get caught, I think it's got to be a bit deflating for them to go into this as the wild card winner. Even if they win tomorrow, I still think that they're going to be kind of struggling a little bit here in the playoffs. So yeah, I'm not going to make a prediction on that game, but I do think that the Cubs are probably playing a bit more deflated than Colorado, who they're kind of where they were expected to be, a good team that made the playoffs but wasn't a division winner, but they're playing.
I don't know. I mean, if you're going to make me put money on it, I guess I would say the Rockies, just because I really think that the Cubs bullpen's in a little bit of trouble right now. I think that they've used their best relievers the last two nights, and it's playoff time, so you have to consider throwing them out there a third night in a row. But the Rockies are just as hot as the Brewers, really, when you think about it. I mean, they rattled off a ton of wins right at the end of the year just to stay alive as well. And so, I don't know. I mean, they definitely have momentum going.
Yeah, that game should be interesting. Obviously, I don't like trying to pick our poison and see what team we want, because I'm completely fine with the Cubs coming into the division series, and 3 of those 5 games, if it goes 5, would be at Miller Park. I think the Brewers are a better team than the Cubs. They're going to send them home crying once again, so I'm fine with that. But I think the Cubs will have their hands full with the Rockies. The Rockies, besides the Brewers, are pretty much the hottest team in the NL as the season wrapped up. I think they had a streak of also 8 wins in a row. And their outfielder, David Dahl, I think had homered in like 6 or 7 straight games down the last week of the season. And also, basically, passing Christian Yelich in the last couple games of the season. Actually, they had the top 2 NL home run hitters with Nolan Arenado, I think, finished with 38 home runs, and Trevor Story, their shortstop, at 37. Yelich ended up with 36. But, I mean, they have a pretty vaunted offense and underrated not only starting pitching but bullpen even. So I think it's a really solid team, and the Brewers might have their hands full themselves if they get past the Cubs in the wild card game. But, again, I think the Brewers are a better club than them, too, so I'm really pretty confident in the entire playoffs now that we're here and now that we're beyond that one-game elimination of even having to deal with the wild card, because the other series that's going on, the other divisional series, will be the Dodgers and Braves. And I think the Dodgers are vulnerable, and I think the Braves are a young team just kind of cutting their teeth in the playoffs for the first time. So I think the Brewers are better than that club, too. I really don't see a team in the NL that's better than the Brewers at this point, and that's pretty exciting, given the fact that as the NL division winners, we finished with the best record in the NL. We will have home field advantage all the way through the National League Championship Series, which is huge in my mind.
Yeah, I agree on that, Craig. And one thing, and this isn't tell the full story because we don't play these teams a ton, but the Brewers played very well against the Rockies this year. And Scott, maybe you could have your intern Letitia look this up, but I think that the Brewers were 5-1 against Colorado on the year.
I'm pretty sure it's 4-2, but
they're 4-2. And then
we'll let Letitia clarify.
Yeah, it could be 4-2. I'm not in front of the computer, but I do know that we played well against the Rockies. I think we split, I want to say, against the Dodgers. I mean, it was.
I think Vince might cut out there for a second. I'm not sure. Scott? Hello?
Yeah. Yep. Go Brewers.
Oh, I didn't know if you were still there. Okay. I'm going to
I'm still here.
But okay. We'll wait for Vince to get on. We'll keep talking, though. So, yeah, the Brewers and Rockies match up fine, too. So we'll see who we get, but I'm very confident with three home games. If it goes 5 in the NLCS, the Brewers will be in really good shape.
Sorry, guys, my call dropped for whatever reason. My final point was just that the Brewers have played heads up against all these teams during the course of the year, so it's just exciting. So sorry about the call dropping there.
Absolutely. Now, I did want to point out one kind of similarity. This is 2018. The Brook Review and the Brook Review fans of the Brook Review show from 10 years ago do remember how magical it was. The 2008 Brewers season. The Brewers at that point had not made the playoffs in 26 years. It seemed like a huge, heavy monkey on their back. They needed to get off a demon. They needed to exercise. And at that season, as Storybook, knows that Doug Melvin acquired Sabathia at a monster second half as the Brewer led us to the wild card championship, and we've made the playoffs for the first time in 26 years. And now in the last 10 years, including that year, we've made the playoffs 3 times. And I think that this is really a signal that the Brewers of old are in the past, and the Brewers can be perennial contenders even as a small market team. However, the thing I wanted to point out that 2008 season, even with Casey's awesome performance second half, it still really came down to that wire. And I know going into that last week, we really needed to win almost every game, and the Brewers did almost that. I believe we won 5 of our last 6 bets, including this. The only loss, I think, was the second last game of the season against Cubs. We had swept, I believe it was Pirates, and then took 2 or 3 of the Cubs to win the wild card. But this last week was even better. I mean, we won our last 7 regular season games, and of course, we added on regular season game, the tying game or whatever they want to call it. We won that. So 8 in a row to finish the season, even better than 2018, and also just as magical of a second half. This time with the bat, Christian Yelich, unbelievable. Like his numbers, he almost won. He came if there were a few more games on the season, he would have easily taken home the first Triple Crown in the NL in 81 years since 1937. So he just missed on that. But he's a slam dunk MVP winner. He won the batting title. The Brewers won the division. There's no one who's going to vote against him for NL MVP, as he will become when that vote comes in. That doesn't happen until after the World Series and such. But he will come in. The votes are in now, I believe. And he will come in as NL MVP. It's the 3rd Brewer in history to be NL MVP, and it's very well deserved. And this is the guy the Brewers acquired last offseason. Unbelievable season.
Just one point. I think he's the 2nd Brewer to win the NL MVP, and then Young was in the AL twice. But definitely, Christian Yelich is a guy that I don't think you can say enough good things. It's like I keep trying to look for words, and Scott and myself and the interns do a lot on our social media stuff, and I've really had a hard time trying to think of other adjectives to describe his season on Twitter recently. At one point, I just said there are no more words to describe this guy. He's, 2 cycles on the year. He put the team on his back. And, let's talk about this September too, Craig. You pointed out, the last 8 games, and I think that that was probably one of the more magical weeks of Brewers baseball. But we were 19-7 in the month of September overall. I mean, it just seemed like this team decided to step it up to a whole new level. To go 19-7 in any month is just nearly impossible. I mean, what these guys did over the stretch was just, to me as a Brewers fan, I don't think that I've seen as hot of a stretch of Brewers baseball as this last month. Maybe the start to the year in 1987, but besides that, it just was everything clicking at the right time. And I think that we've talked about it on this podcast before, but it seemed like in times this year where, again, we were very solid all year for the most part, outside of a couple bad stretches. But, there were times when the pitching really carried us, and then there were other times when the offense carried us. And it seems like now everything is finally clicking. And we had talked about how this team could be really tough if everything clicked. And I think September was just everything clicking at once. It's pretty awesome to watch right now.
Yeah, and when you had mentioned earlier that it was such a great day that we acquired Yelich and Kane basically the same day.
The same hour.
And when you look at that now, it's like not only, okay, you're talking about guys that are typically batting 1 and 2 in the order, but they're also, they're both top 10 in WAR this year. Kane in his own right is probably a top 10 MVP candidate. I mean, it's been unbelievable. We're
probably top 5.
Without those guys. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And then to expand a little bit about Yelich, I was trying to think back, Remember when Aguiar was just so ridiculously hot that we were talking that he might even, if he kept it up, he could potentially even be an MVP candidate? Ridiculous. Like, we're talking about 3 different Brewers out of our 8 starters, potential MVP at some point.
Well, yes, Scotty. And Aguirre's numbers were awesome. I mean, his final numbers were his power numbers were right at the top of the league almost. I mean, he did. Obviously, his first half is what carries a lot of those numbers, and he did go through a bit of a second half slump. But that being said, I mean, he has been a guy who this year has really stepped up as well, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for the stability that he's provided over at first base and the protection in the lineup that he gives guys like Yelich and Kane, who are at the top of the order, rely on guys behind them to provide some protection. So, I mean, you got to give credit, even though the numbers weren't quite as gaudy this year with the batting average, to guys like Travis Shaw, Aguiar, even Ryan Braun, especially in September. I mean, they're just kind of 1 through 5 in this Brewers lineup have been rock solid. And then you add in guys like Sakis and others who have some playoff experience. It's a really tough lineup, a very tough lineup.
Well, and those guys that you pointed out, like before the day we fired Yelich and Kane, Brewer fans had no idea that those 3 players would even have a role at all on the 2018 Milwaukee Brewers. And Jesus Aguilar, Christian Yelich, and Lorenzo Kane were added, basically. I mean, Aguilar was with us last year, but, I mean, he really was a key member to a team that came 1 win short of the playoffs last year. And then you add those guys to the team, and that's incredible. And some of our best hitters last year, arguably, you could say they were obviously Shaw, Santana, Thames, and even Braun, our former MVP. Those guys, the depth in this team is ridiculous. Those guys are still with the club. Thames and Braun are now platooning, pretty much. And then you've got Santana, who spent almost the entire second half in the minor leagues, and now he's back, and he had a huge hit in the last game of the season, a huge double that really set up the Brewers for the go-ahead run. And then you've got Travis Shaw, who has been shuffled around the field, even though he's hit over 30 bombs himself this year, and he got moved to second base for Jonathan freaking Scope. So unbelievable depth on this team.
Yeah, and when you think about just the depth overall with the team and how, I mean, you just looked at any time if there was any kind of a reason that anyone would get hurt or someone would be unavailable, there's always somebody to step up. Kind of leads into a quick segue. Believe it or not, in this tiebreaker game, it sort of went unnoticed that, Woodruff was there warming up in case Hader got in any kind of trouble at the end of that game. Turns out, Adam McCulvey reported that Jeffers is not available to pitch in that actual division clinching game. He is, however, going to be available in the playoffs, and it's an undisclosed reason. I don't even want to speculate. I actually asked our source, Tom Carter, if he knew anything about it. He kind of made me think maybe he does, but he wouldn't even give me any information. So mom's the word on this one. I don't know. You guys, any thoughts?
Just say TC, Scott. TC, not Tom.
Tom Carter's an anonymous source. You go T. Carter or Tom C. That's it. You can't just say that. And I'm surprised it wasn't our colleague Tom Walkerport that reported it. But yeah,
he's usually on top of all that.
Oh yeah, no, he does a human's labor every day. But
bang up job.
Yeah. But no, it is interesting. And Jeffers, he had the neck cramps last week, and I don't know if something's going on. I hope not. I don't want to speculate, so I don't think it's fair to go there. I'm hoping it's just like some aggravating neck injury of some type, like was described a few days ago. And, he has pitched since then. He pitched just, a couple of days ago. I don't think it's anything too serious. I think it is just some sort of nagging injury, and they do want to keep him as fresh as possible for the first round of the playoffs. And guys, let's not forget, this win today was huge, but the Brewers were already guaranteed a playoff spot. We knew that there was going to be a game after today, no matter what happened. So the win is big, but I don't think that the Brewers were willing to risk Jeffers not being available for the rest of the playoffs if there is an aggravating injury. And even if it was just an injury, which I think it is, I don't think that the Brewers, want to speculate on that in a public way right now, with other teams, of course, paying very close attention to what Milwaukee is doing.
Well, Scott's intern told me before that we started that she thought his THC levels were just a little too high or something. So she should be able to get over that, no problem, I'm sure. So, but I mean, unbelievable, this team. We're going to have a couple of home field advantage throughout the playoffs in the NL. That's huge. Now this season, I did notice that we didn't make it to the World Series. What our team has a better record would host or have home field advantage for the World Series, and I believe over most of the teams in the AL, we wouldn't have that advantage. But regardless, let's just get there and deal with it. But I mean, one thing I guess we could talk about, and I don't know, but the Brewers have had a luxury in September of having an expanded roster, more than 25 man, and with their great depth that really came to play. Now that's one advantage that'll kind of get taken away during playoffs. The Council have a very tough job setting a 25 man roster because there are going to be some really quality players left off the Brewers 25 man playoff roster. That's for sure. I don't know if you guys want to speculate on any key players you think might get left off, but I think at least one of Broxton, Santana, or Thames probably needs to get left off. I don't know if that's just a bland discussion. You want to throw out which one or two of those guys you think might not make the 25 man.
Boy, that's a tough call. And really quick, guys, I just wanted to point out, Craig, to go along with what you were saying earlier before the Jeffers talk. I think that you asked a question back in our first or second podcast asking what is the difference between this 2018 Brewers team and last year's that collapsed on the stretch. And we obviously the answers are Kane and Yelich, but you hit on it before. I think the bench is the biggest difference. I think that the strength of this bench is incredible. And I think that when you've got guys like, Granderson or Shaw or Braun or whoever isn't playing that day at another position on the bench, I think that just is such a huge strength to be able to throw those guys into the mix late into a game. So in any event, that plays into the other question. And I don't know who gets left off. I think, unfortunately, because he's cold, I think Eric Thames may get left off the roster, and maybe Broxton as well. I guess it depends on how many pitchers they want to carry. But, I could see Broxton still being on the team for defensive purposes, especially, and definitely a guy that can pinch run. We don't have that pinch running specialist so much as we did last year with, I guess we call him Quentin Berry just for that reason at the end of the year last year. And maybe Granderson was that, but I don't think he's quite there anymore at the age of 38 or 39. So I guess Broxton, I think, would stay over Thames, but it's hard to say, a left-handed power bat off the bench in Thames is pretty valuable as well. So it's a really tough call.
I actually think Santana will be the most likely of those three to not make it. As crazy as that sounds, because I think Thames' versatility to back up an infield spot at first and also the outfield and a left-handed bat off the bench is more valuable than Santana now. So I think he should be included. If you have Santana and Broxton, Santana's a better hitter, not as good defensively, and also not as good of a runner. And so late game replacement with our type of bullpen, the way the formula works, Broxton seems like a better fit, unfortunately. It's really a tough call. And it's actually a possibility if we want to carry more pitching that two of those three might have to get left off, actually. But it's tough. It'll definitely be a tough decision. That's one luxury that the Brewers had in September, and they definitely utilized it. As Vince pointed out, they went 19-7, which is amazing. Even more amazing is the fact that they won almost every single series in September. Very consistent. And I believe they only lost 2 games one time in September. 2 games in a row, one time in September, which is incredible.
I know we lost the Pittsburgh series at home, but it's hard to.
Yeah, it was. That was it. That was the only time we lost 2 games in a row against Pittsburgh. Beyond that, basically, and a team that doesn't lose 2 games in a row because of their great depth on the offensive side and amazing shutdown bullpen, that's a team that's going to do well in the postseason, in my opinion. Because if you're not used to losing a couple games in a row, you're not going to lose a playoff series, in my opinion. Yeah, and Craig, your point about the depth is an interesting one. I mean, the Brewers may have utilized that expanded roster depth a little bit better than other teams. And, we have weapons that we weren't even talking about right here on the podcast, guys like Tyler Saladino and Hernan Perez, guys that you could really count on many times in big situations. The thing with that, though, is that every team has that, so I don't view it as a huge liability for the Brewers because every team is losing the roster flexibility that they had over the past month. So
I don't worry about that quite as much. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Eric James has been really cold in September. He's one of the few Brewers that is going through kind of a prolonged slump. But that being, I think it's going to come down to matchups, where James is your left-handed power thrower off the bench and Santana for right-handed. It's a really, really tough call.
I think James' struggle is mainly in September or kind of due to the fact that now Santana and Broxton are back on the roster and they need to get some at-bats in the outfield. And really he was only – and Braun was back to being more consistent and not even a platoon partner as much. And so James lost a lot of at-bats and therefore was doing tons of pinch hitting, again, because of our bullpen depth and the usage of our bench. He was doing a lot of pinch hitting, but as a pinch hitter, it's really tough to get consistent. Unless you're used to that, being a pinch hitter, that's a tough spot. But, of course, that's probably how we use him in the playoffs. So James is definitely, as much as I would pick him to make the roster, I think he's a legitimate candidate to be left off. So we'll see.
I think if you're looking to do that, though, I mean, there's actually a few arms that I would consider leaving off well before that even. I mean, we don't really necessarily know what we're going to get out of Zach Davies, who's just recently back from injury. I mean, a guy like Jordan Lyles or Jennings hasn't been able to get lefties out recently. Albers even, I don't know.
All four of those guys you just mentioned, Scott, actually aren't going to make it.
I would tend to agree. And with Jennings, we've got other lefties that can, get the job done, I think, a little bit better right now. Guys like Xavier Cedeno have been really solid. So it'd be surprising, and of course Josh Hader. So it'd be really surprising to me to have us carry a guy like Jennings. The Brewers clearly haven't had much faith in Albers. I think he's pitched literally twice in the last month or so. So yeah, I mean, it'd be a huge shock to see one of those guys make it. Davies, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I tend to agree that none of those guys will probably make the postseason roster, with Davies being the strongest, maybe. But who knows?
I think not only all four of the guys Scott mentioned won't make it, there's probably even some consideration on whether or not probably only two of these three guys will make it, and that would be Peralta, Woodruff, and Anderson. I think Corbin Burns is a lock, but for that middle bullpen area, and I think they have some confidence in him. But I think only two of the three guys, Anderson, Woodruff, and Peralta will make it. Which one of those guys would you leave off?
Peralta, and that's not because of his talent level. It's just because the Brewers haven't used him a ton. I just don't know if his innings count is going to be a factor in that. So I guess Peralta, but boy, that's a tough call as well. I mean, I think the Brewers do want to see Chase available in the playoffs, so I would hesitate to put him on that list. The real question for me is Woodruff. So the Brewers were obviously willing to put him into a pretty clutch situation today by having him warm up in the ninth in case Hader faltered, but he's also been sent down, I think, 5 or 6 different times this season. So certainly the Brewers don't necessarily view him as a vital cog this year. I don't know. I guess Peralta, but that's a very tough call.
Scott, your thoughts?
I honestly don't know, but I think just the fact that we skipped his last start, I almost think it might be Chase, which is kind of interesting because he really hasn't he's pitched decent all year. He hasn't just gone out there and bombed or anything like that. And to see a guy like that fall from grace to the point where from being a opening day starter all the way down to, potentially not being on the roster is kind of interesting. But, he hasn't pitched good lately, but he also hasn't pitched bad. And, unfortunately, that's not good enough.
He's still got a sub-4 ERA on the year, and I'd just be very surprised. But, yeah, I could be wrong about that. It's weird how they were going to skip starts. I mean, who would have thought, besides Craig, on opening day that we would be keeping Wade Miley on the postseason roster and demoting Chase Anderson? Oh, boy.
Wow, yeah.
That is unbelievable. But to answer, I'm going to just be different from you guys and say Woodruff. I don't know, though. It's hard. I kind of almost lean toward what Scott's saying is maybe Chase, because if you look back to just a week from today and last time we did our podcast, the Brewers had just defeated the Cardinals. Yeah. And at that point, our playoff spot was a little precarious. And to think a week later and basically 8 wins later, it's amazingly solidified is pretty cool. But back then, I mean, that was a big day because Counsell was I thought was doing a a prep game for how he might handle a wild card or a one-game elimination game or whatever you want to call it, since that doesn't have to exist now. And instead of starting Chase, whose spot was up in the rotation at that time, he went with a strategy, obviously, where he tried to get Matt Carpenter out with Jennings to lead off the game. And then basically his secret strategy was to put in Peralta for a couple of innings and then turn over the rest of the bullpen. And that worked out really well. And because of that, I almost think that you might lean the same direction for a playoff scenario where one of our starters wouldn't be available. We'd do that same route where we'd give Peralta a couple of innings and then do kind of an unadvertised bullpen game or whatever. So over a Chase start, but I don't know. I tend to think that the Council will, because of his veteran and what he's done for the team in the past, including just last year, that Chase will probably get a spot and Woodruff might be the odd man out. But then again, we might also just keep one less bat or something like that and sneak all three of those guys in. So who knows? But it'll be interesting. There definitely will be some really good talented player that unfortunately will get left off the playoff roster.
Right.
But I know that is it between every. I'm pretty sure it's between every division, every series of the playoffs that you can reset your 25 man if necessary, or
you can, and you can also do it in the series if there's an injury. And if this was Doug Melvin, I wouldn't put it past him to have some sort of arm soreness pop up for a game one starter to sneak somebody else on the roster. But I don't know if David Stearns rolls like that. But yeah, Greg, you're right on. It can be done between series, and then it can also be done due to an injury. It would be the two scenarios.
Yeah, and with that being said, I mean, the first series is a 5-gamer. It's very possible that we could go a little bit bat heavy, for that first series, and then flip a bat out for an arm, for a Game 7 series later on. You just never know.
Yeah, that's why maybe Chase will be left off the NLDS, but then be added back on for a 7-game series.
That's very possible, and it is interesting because I think all these guys have got to stick around, and they're still. I don't know if they're still on the actual bench. I actually asked Adam McKelvey that today, and I have not heard a response to that yet. So I'm curious, sort of the logistics behind whether the guys are on the bench or in the clubhouse, or do they watch the games from the stands, or do they fly home and then fly back if they're called back up? It's kind of weird how that works, but be interested to find out an answer.
Yeah, that is an interesting question, Vince. I mean, I would think they would at least be allowed in the clubhouse, but I mean, I don't know. It's not like they can grab a bat and come running out there.
Right, but in the event of if there's an injury, say in Game 1 in Milwaukee in the NLDS, if you can't just be sitting at home. I don't think, because if you're activated for Game 2, you may not even get there in time otherwise. So they've got to be around. I just don't know if they're sitting in street clothes out in the stands watching the game, or if they're hanging out in the clubhouse. I don't think that they can be on the bench, but I could be wrong. So I'm hopeful we can get an answer to that, and then we'll report back to our fans on social media or on our next podcast with an answer. I'm very genuinely curious as to that.
Yeah, very interesting. So I think we're almost running out of time here, guys, but the Brewers are not running out of time. We are going to be having home field advantage throughout the NL side of the playoffs, including the NLDS, which our opponents will be determined possibly by the time you're listening to this. And I'm uber confident, and I know that when both Scott and Vince fly back in for Game 1 of the NLDS, you will be greeted by a lot of Brewer fans, a lot of Brooker Review fans at the airport. There's several of my interns that said they'd be willing to pick you guys up.
Awesome.
And put you up in a nice hotel and whatnot on the Channel 14 stipend.
Oh, yeah. That's great. No, I can't wait. I'm going to try to fly back possibly on Thursday. I do have a meeting that morning. Depending on what time it gets done. If I can make the game, though, on Thursday night, it would probably be worth the trip because then I can get 2 games in. So if not, I may wait till the NLCS, but we'll see. I'm hopeful. I'll find out tomorrow. So.
Sounds good, Scott. And Vince and Scott, what are your flight plans?
Not real sure, but I do see here I'm going to get saved by the bell because we're basically out of time. I'm just going to say congrats to the Brewers. Going to be another banner up at Miller Park next year. I'm very excited to see it. Go Brewers and stay classy.
Yeah, stay classy, guys.
Brewer fans.
Go Brewers. Follow us on social media. BrewReview1 at gmail.com. BrewReview1 on Twitter.
And Scott will update his actual flight details on Twitter so you can greet him at the airport.
Sounds good, guys. Hey, thanks. Go Brewers.
Go Brewers.
Go Brewers.